coming up on Arirang News. The inspection team that'll choose the winning bid for the World Expo 2030 arrives in South Korea's southeastern port city of Busan and receives an enthusiastic welcome from citizens. The on-site evaluation kicks off this week with the team visiting the city's landmarks and meeting with leaders and citizens. For the first time in 5 years, South Korea joins the UN Human Rights Council as a co-sponsor of a resolution adopted on North Korea's human rights abuses. South Korea's fiscal deficit reaches an all-time high despite more taxes collected last year due to more government spending. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin tonight at South Korea's port city of Busan. The inspection team that'll choose the winning bid for the World Expo 2030 arrives in Busan for an on-site evaluation this week. Upon arrival, they receive an enthusiastic welcome from citizens. Our Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
The on-site three-day inspection in Busan has begun. An 8-member delegation from the Bureau International des Expositions arrived in the city on Tuesday and received a warm welcome from approximately 5,000 citizens in front of Busan Station. They were also greeted by different kinds of performances, including a demonstration of Korea's traditional percussion music, samulnori. During their 3-day stay, the inspection team will visit the proposed venues and landmarks and meet with city leaders and citizens. On their first day, the team visits Ulsukdo Ecological Park, followed by a bid presentation and a dinner hosted by the Busan Mayor. On Wednesday, the delegation is set to visit Busan North Port, the proposed main expo venue. Later in the day, they will attend a K-Culture Night concert. The final day, which falls on Thursday, will consist of a final presentation, a visit to the UN Memorial Cemetery, and lunch with international students in Busan. The delegation will be leaving South Korea on Friday, marking the end of their month-long trip to the bidding countries. The team will then make a report based on its 6-day trip to South Korea. The report will include a comprehensive assessment of Busan, including the qualities of the venues, conditions of local public transportation, and Korea's financing plans to support the event. The report for the 4 bidding cities, Korea's Busan, Saudi Arabia's Riyadh, Italy's Rome, and Ukraine's Odessa, will be made available to the 171 BIE member states during the June General Assembly before voting for a winner in November. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
And as the southern port city hopes to bring home the 2030 World Expo, our Song Yu-jin sat down with the Busan Mayor for more on the city's prospects.
The Bureau of International Expositions, or BIE, is starting its on-site inspection in Busan on Tuesday. It's time for Busan to show what it's got after kicking off its World Expo project 9 years ago. Busan Mayor Park Hyung-jun has been one of the bid's key players since he took office in 2021. Ahead of the BIE's visit to Busan, Arirang News had the chance to speak with the mayor himself. He says the excitement towards the expo is higher than ever.
All of us here in Busan are busily preparing for the inspection. We hope the BIE feels this expo fever when they arrive here. Throughout this expo week, 16 districts are holding 67 expo-related events. Wherever the BIE goes, our citizens will warmly welcome them.
As for specifically what the city has been focusing on, the mayor says it's universal values that the whole world can relate to.
The Expo is not just an event, it's a festival that shows where humanity should be heading in the future. So we thought that showing our efforts to tackle climate change and going eco-friendly was important. We focused on cleaning up the city and making it greener.
Competing with the Italian capital Rome, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and Ukraine's Odessa is tough. But Mayor Park is confident that Busan has what it takes to win.
Busan is one of the most open-minded and inclusive cities in Korea. It was home to numerous war refugees during the Korean War, and this is where Korea's industrialization and democracy movement flourished. We are a global logistics hub, home to the world's second-largest transshipment port. Our strengths in culture and tourism also prove why we should be the host city.
A united, supportive community is another advantage.
The competition to win the bid has heated up. I can say that South Korea is working as a more tightly knit team than any other candidate. What's noteworthy is that not only top-down but bottom-up, voluntary efforts from the public are spreading rapidly.
Mayor Park will be leading the charge throughout the BIE's 4-day visit to Busan. Not only the mayor, but the city as a whole will pull an all-out effort to bring their A-game.
Busan is good for World Expo, and Busan is ready. 화이팅!
송유진, 아리랑 뉴스.
The UN Human Rights Council has passed a resolution condemning North Korea's gross human rights violations. South Korea co-sponsored this year's resolution for the first time in 5 years. South Korea did not co-sponsor such a resolution from 2019 to 2022 under the previous administration. The resolution contains demands for Pyongyang to respect freedom of speech and allow independent media. It also urges the North to provide relevant information, including the whereabouts of foreigners detained or kidnapped in the country, which appears to reflect Seoul's demand for clarification on the death of a South Korean fisheries official in 2020. The Council has adopted such a resolution condemning North Korea's human rights abuses for 21 years in a row. The Asian Development Bank's economic forecast for South Korea for the year ahead remains unchanged from its earlier outlook from December last year, standing at 1.5%. Tuesday's prediction is a little lower than the predicted GDP growth set by the ASEAN Macroeconomic Research Office at 1.7%, as well as the Bank of Korea and the country's economy ministry forecasting growth at 1.6%. The ADB cited the unresolved Ukraine crisis and high interest rates as economic challenges to be faced this year by countries in the Asia-Pacific region. South Korea's fiscal deficit reaches an all-time high last year despite more taxes collected due to bigger government spending. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korea's deficit and government spending reached a new high last year. The deficit rose to around 117 trillion won, or at the current rate, around 89 billion US dollars, the highest on record. That's according to the 2022 National Settlement Report released on Tuesday. Although the deficit surged last year, total tax revenue rose to more than $436 billion. That's up from the year before by nearly 38 billion. This is largely attributed to the government spending more money on the country's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic instead of paying off debt. The government also approved an additional supplementary budget last May after President Yoon took office. The government will have about $2 billion remaining that it can use for an extra budget without having to get approval from the National Assembly. The national debt, meanwhile, rose to around $812 billion, up more than $50 billion from the year before. Debt taken on by the central government came to around $785 billion at the current rate, and local governments around $26 billion. Meanwhile, long-term liabilities like pension payments and bonds rose to a new high of $1.8 trillion last year, up 6% from a year earlier. The debt-to-GDP ratio amounted to nearly 50%, up from the year before by nearly 3 percentage points. That amounts to more than $15,700 of debt per person, the first time the average debt has exceeded $15,000. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's consumer inflation slows, falling to the lowest level in a year last month on a cooling of energy prices. But concerns linger as this may be temporary following the surprise cut in output by OPEC+. Young reports.
South Korea's inflation growth eased in March to its lowest level in 12 months. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, jumped 4.2% on year last month. That's 0.6 percentage points lower than the month before. The growth peaked last July but has started to decline since then. The eased March figure was mainly driven by lower prices of petroleum products, which plunged 14.2% from a year earlier, marking another on-year decrease after also dropping in February. That's the largest decline since November 2020, when prices fell 14.9% on year. Meanwhile, prices of agricultural, fisheries, and livestock products rose by 3% on year, higher than the previous month. Prices of agricultural products rose by 4.7% due to skyrocketing vegetable prices. Utility fees, including electricity, gas, and water, again soared by 28.4% on year, hitting an all-time high figure. Price growth for processed food softened from the previous month with a growth of 9.1%. Statistics Korea, however, is forecasting that lower-priced petroleum products may not last, considering a recent announcement by the OPEC+, with the bloc saying oil production will be cut.
Global oil prices always have a significant impact on the government's outlook regarding prices. Recently, there was an international oil production cut, which is expected to primarily affect the prices of petroleum products and other related areas.
Also on Tuesday, the Bank of Korea held a meeting regarding consumer price rises. A central bank official says the growth of consumer prices will continue to show a downward trend due to the base effect of last year's increase. Core consumer prices without volatile food and energy prices are also expected to see smaller increases, albeit at a slower pace than consumer prices. Yoon, Arirang News.
President Yoon has promised to help South Korea stay #1 in OLED display production through incentives that foster investment along with support for research and development. This came on Tuesday in the city of Asan in Chungcheongnam-do province, where the president attended a ceremony for Samsung Display's investment of $3.1 billion into local producers of material, parts, and equipment for chips to expand production. President Yoon called it a new step forward for the industry and also the first of many other massive investments. By 2026, 10 million OLED panels for IT devices will be able to be produced there, 5 times more than the capacity at the moment. Accompanying the president were Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Jae-yong and local politicians. The combined sales figures of Hyundai Motor and Kia in the United States during the first 3 months of this year reached an all-time high, largely due to robust sales of SUVs and eco-friendly vehicles. Data released by Hyundai on Tuesday shows that 382,000 units were sold, which is a rise of 18.5% on year. Hyundai sold over 198,000 units, up more than 15% from a year earlier, while Kia sold more than 184,000 units, an almost 22% on-year rise. Eco-friendly vehicles rose 27%, accounting over 14% of the total sales. The company also ranked 4th in the U.S. auto market in the first quarter of 2023, with General Motors taking the first place. As South Korea and the United States celebrate their 70th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year, our Lee Dae-hyun had the chance to talk to the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Korea on prospects for bilateral economic cooperation.
7 decades have passed since South Korea and the U.S. agreed to sign a mutual defense treaty in 1953. And these defense ties have now grown into a stronger partnership, widening to several fields other than security. That's especially true on the economic front. Seoul and Washington boast one of the largest trade relationships in the world, with bilateral investment and trade totaling $1.6 trillion annually. And some U.S. companies now see South Korea as an attractive market to do business in.
An interesting example is the New York Times. They actually moved their regional headquarters from Hong Kong to Korea. They actually looked at a lot of countries, but they chose Korea for all the reasons we spoke about. So I think that the Korean government's already making good progress, and as they start to tweak a few more things, this should be a real good place for many U.S. companies to operate in, invest in.
The chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea says that President Yoon and his so-called dream team have brought changes to the country's business environment.
Take a look at some of the things they've already fixed for us, including the flat tax for foreigners. That was a huge win. And I understand that President Yoon and his team are working on refining things like the Serious Accident Punishment Act, the 52-hour work week. Those are all very positive signs that he has come into office and has already made impact, which shows really outstanding possibilities for U.S. companies.
In fact, a flat income tax rate of 19% is offered to foreigners who work in South Korea. Starting this year, this tax benefit will be applied for 20 years, up from the original 5 years. Asked how the two countries should further cooperate, particularly in light of the recent Inflation Reduction Act and the U.S. CHIPS Act, the chairman says South Korea is going to remain an important partner of the U.S.
I think we should also look at not just short-term, but long-term. There could be some short-term challenges, but over the long term, I'm very confident that the two countries will achieve a win-win solution. And I think that's the way we ought to look at things.
He added South Korea should be even more aggressive about competing against other countries to make the country a regional headquarters, pledging that AmCham will also be part of that process. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Global oil prices tumbled more than 6% on Monday in sharp response to planned production cuts by OPEC members and its allies. Choi Min-jung reports.
Oil prices jumped on Monday, the day after OPEC Plus nations announced surprise production cuts of more than 1 million barrels a day on fears of weakening demand. International oil benchmark Brent crude jumped by more than $5 or 6.3% to almost $85 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude also surged by 6.3% to a little over $80 a barrel after rising to a 2-month high during the session. Members of OPEC Plus, comprising of major oil exporting countries and Russia, shook the market with its decision to lower its production target by another 1.16 million barrels per day. This brings the total amount of cuts by the alliance to over 3 million barrels per day, combined with the 2 million barrel cut announced last October. Estimates show that this is around 3.7% of global demand. In response to the cuts, analysts at Goldman Sachs raised their year-end price forecast for Brent crude by $5 to $95 a barrel. It also hiked its forecast for the end of 2024 to $100 a barrel. Experts say this could eventually prompt more aggressive interest rate hikes from central banks, pushing economies closer to a recession. Against this backdrop, the U.S. disagreed with the production cuts.
Look, we don't think that production cuts are advisable at this moment, given market uncertainty, and we made that clear.
However, Washington's response was milder than in October, when cuts came amid soaring gas prices as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
On the second day of government interpellation at the National Assembly, President Yoon Suk-yeol's veto of the opposition-led Grain Act revision that mandates the government purchases surplus rice sparked wrangling. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
Rival lawmakers at the National Assembly questioned government officials on Tuesday, focusing on the economy this time. On the second day of the 3-day interpellation, the Prime Minister and the Ministers of Finance, Agriculture, and Transport, among others, were in attendance. Lawmakers asked them questions involving the rising energy bills, low birth rate, and South Korea's economic relations with Japan. The key question of the day was on the recently passed revision of the Grain Management Act, which President Yoon Suk-yeol had vetoed earlier on Tuesday.
What was the main reason for the veto?
We think the law forcing the government to purchase surplus rice is not helpful to farmers or to our finances. Researchers say that purchasing surplus rice would lead to overproduction, which would eventually lead to a fall in price.
The opposition, which last month pushed for the passing of the bill, called for better treatment of the farming industry.
I think the government should treat our agricultural industry well. It's helped our economy become the 8th largest in the world. What do you think?
I completely agree with the agricultural sector's contribution to South Korea's economic advancement, but the problem is the agricultural environment is rapidly changing. Demand is decreasing, and I think it's time we employ policies that suit the needs of farmers.
The revised Grain Management Act calls on the government to buy surplus rice if demand falls short of production by 3 to 5%, or if prices fall by 5 to 8% or more from the year prior. Now, this is the first time that President Yoon exercised his veto power, and also the first time the executive right was used since 2016. The vetoed act will now be put to a vote once again at the National Assembly. For it to pass, it requires over 2/3 of the votes of at least half of the parliament's lawmakers in attendance. If passed, the government has to accept the bill. But considering how 115 out of 299 lawmakers are part of the ruling People Power Party, making up over 1/3 of the parliament, it's widely expected that the bill will not pass the assembly this time. 이시후, 아리랑 뉴스.
BTS member Jimin's new single, Like Crazy, has topped the Billboard Hot 100 chart, making him the first K-pop solo artist to mark this milestone. Lee Seung-jae has more.
BTS as a group may be on hiatus, but individually, members have been successfully launching their solo careers. This includes Jimin, who made history on Monday when his single Like Crazy from his album Face topped the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Jimin becomes the very first solo K-pop artist to top the Billboard Hot 100. According to Billboard, the song also topped the digital single sales chart with combined sales of 254,000 song downloads and CD singles. The chart-topping single was released on March 24th with the track coming from Jimin's debut solo album, which debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 album charts. Before Jimin, Psy reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 with its 2012 hit Gangnam Style. Like Crazy has a very 1970s sound with a synth-pop theme, and Jimin participated directly in the songwriting process. According to the artist himself, the song is about expressing the emotions of the moment when you turn away from reality to forget your scars. He added that his debut album was inspired by emotions felt during the 3+ years of the COVID-19 pandemic. Music critics say Jimin's success on the Billboard chart is further proof of BTS's global success, while adding that synth-pop's unique retro atmosphere and comfortable melodies are easily approachable for global music fans. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Make sure to have your umbrellas handy for the next few days. Nationwide rain is in store until this Thursday. This round of rainfall will help ease off the prolonged dryness. With the cold rain, temperatures will be on the cooler side. For places like Daegwallyeong in Gangwon-do province, maximum temperatures will be breezy at only 13 degrees. The south of the country will see heavy downpours for tomorrow. For mountainous regions of Jeju Island, up to 300 millimeters are in the forecast. The south coast will see about 120. Inland regions, including the Seoul metropolitan area, will see relatively less with about 20 to 80 millimeters. But keep in mind that local downpours are possible overnight, which could lead to flooding and landslides. Please take extra precautions. And rain spells will dominate nationwide. Seoul will be starting off at 12 degrees tomorrow. Daily highs won't be rising too much. Seoul will get up to 17 degrees. Chuncheon, Daegu, and Gyeongju will all be reaching 16 degrees. And after the rain, morning temperatures will plunge to single figures. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the most up-to-date news tomorrow. Have a good night.